He found her frozen in the snow, then whispered, "You're safe now." Heart-touching, the year was 2187. The world had changed. Once a thriving planet full of green fields, bustling cities, and life, Earth was now a cold, barren wasteland. Snow covered the ground for miles, and the wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it the remnants of humanity's past. The Earth was no longer a place of warmth or beauty, but a frozen world, struggling to survive. Jack Turner didn't mind. He was used to the cold. He'd spent most of his life in the wilderness, first as a soldier, then as a cowboy, roaming the frozen plains in search of whatever he could find to survive. Earth had become a place where only the strong, the determined, and the lonely could survive. Jack fit in perfectly. He lived in a small, run-down shelter on the edge of what used to be a small town in the mountains. Every morning he went out to scavenge for food, supplies, and anything that might be useful. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble often found him. The wilds were full of predators, both human and animal, and even some things Jack wasn't sure he wanted to know about. But he always survived. That's what mattered. On this particular day, Jack had been walking through the snow-covered landscape for hours. The wind bit at his face, and the snow crunched under his boots. He wasn't sure where he was headed, just out searching. He preferred the solitude, the quiet. It gave him time to think, to forget the world that had been lost. As he rounded a bend in the canyon, something caught his eye. A strange shimmer against the stark white of the snow. At first, he thought it was just the sun playing tricks on him, but when he took a step closer, he realized something was wrong. In the middle of the snowdrift lay a figure, someone or something, half buried in the ice. Jack froze, his instincts kicking in. His hand went to the rifle slung across his back, but he didn't raise it. There was no immediate threat. He cautiously approached the figure. The closer he got, the more he realized that it was a woman. Her body was encased in some kind of strange crystal-like armor that glinted in the weak sunlight. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The armor was translucent, almost as if it had grown out of her skin, shimmering with an eerie glow. Her face was pale, her hair frozen into delicate strands of ice. She lay motionless in the snow, her body stiff from the cold. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had seen people frozen before, victims of the cold, casualties of the Earth's slow death. But this woman wasn't like them. There was something otherworldly about her. For a moment, Jack hesitated. He had always been a survivor, not a rescuer, but something inside him urged him to act. He knelt beside the woman, his breath clouding in the cold air as he checked her pulse. It was faint, but it was there. She was alive, but just barely. Jack's brow furrowed. How had she ended up here, in the middle of nowhere, frozen in the snow? He had never seen anything like it. He touched the strange armor, his fingers brushing the surface. It was smooth to the touch, yet there was a slight hum beneath his fingers, as if the armor was alive in some way. Without thinking, he began to carefully dig around her, clearing the snow and ice that had trapped her. It wasn't easy. Everything was frozen solid, but Jack was determined. He had to get her out of the snow. He wasn't sure why, but something about this woman made him feel like he couldn't leave her there. After what felt like hours, Jack finally freed her from the snow. He carefully lifted her into his arms, the weight of her small frame surprising him. Her armor was heavier than it looked, but it wasn't enough to stop him. Jack turned and began making his way back to his shelter, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. The wind had picked up, and the snowstorm that had been lingering in the distance was now creeping closer. Jack knew he had to get her back to safety before the storm hit. He had no idea who she was or where she came from, but right now, she was his responsibility. As he walked, he couldn't help but glance down at her. Her features were delicate, almost ethereal. Her skin was pale, but not from the cold. There was something strange about it, like it was made of something other than human flesh. Her eyes were closed, her lips slightly parted. Jack couldn't help but feel an overwhelming urge to protect her, even though he didn't know her, even though he had no idea what kind of danger she might bring. When he finally reached his shelter, Jack carefully laid her down on the floor by the fire. He set about starting a fire, his hands moving automatically as he worked. He had to warm her up. She had to survive. Minutes turned into hours, and the storm outside grew stronger. Jack couldn't afford to waste time. He found a blanket and wrapped it around her, then started to heat some water. He checked her pulse again, and it was still faint, but steady. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. As the hours passed, Jack found himself talking to her, even though he didn't expect any answer. It was the loneliness that made him do it. He had spent years alone, and now, with her in his care, he found himself speaking to her like she was an old friend. "You're safe now," he whispered softly, his voice breaking the silence of the cabin. He wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe it was just a reassurance to himself. Maybe it was the hope that somehow she would hear him. "I'll take care of you. You're safe now." Her breathing was slow but steady, and for the first time in what felt like years, Jack allowed himself to relax. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't alone. The storm raged outside, but inside the shelter there was warmth. Jack didn't know what the future held, but as he sat by the fire watching over the mysterious woman, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave her. Not now. Not ever. The fire crackled softly in the small shelter, the warmth spreading throughout the room as Jack watched over the mysterious woman. It had been hours since he brought her inside, and the storm outside raged on with full force. But inside, there was a sense of quiet stillness, and for the first time in what seemed like ages, Jack allowed himself to breathe a little easier. The woman, who had yet to speak, lay on the cot Jack had found for her, wrapped in a thick blanket he'd managed to heat. Her strange armor was now lying beside her, a beautiful and odd thing that shimmered in the firelight. The armor looked almost like it was alive, moving slightly as though it had a will of its own. Jack was no stranger to oddities in the frozen wasteland, but this was unlike anything he had ever seen. He couldn't stop wondering who she was and how she ended up out there, frozen in the snow. Her features were striking, with pale skin that seemed almost ethereal and delicate. Her hair, a pale silver, was still wet from the thaw, and Jack could see the icy strands glistening under the dim light. But what stood out the most was her face. There was a softness to it, but also an air of mystery, as though she held secrets that could change everything. Jack didn't know why he was so drawn to her. He had no idea who she was or where she came from. But deep down, something in him told him to help her, to protect her. He couldn't explain it, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. As the hours passed, Jack kept watch over her, occasionally checking her pulse. It had gotten stronger, and her breathing, though still slow, was more regular. She was recovering, but Jack knew it would take time. The cold had been too harsh. He had seen it before, people who froze in the wastelands, unable to survive. Most didn't make it, but there was something different about her. The sound of a low moan pulled Jack from his thoughts. He looked over to find the woman stirring, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment she didn't move, as if still lost in some distant dream. Then her eyes focused on him, and Jack saw a flash of confusion cross her face. Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper. "Where am I?" Jack's heart skipped a beat. Her voice was melodic, and there was an accent to it he couldn't place. It wasn't anything like the accents he had heard from the survivors in the area. This was different, otherworldly even. He had no idea what to say, but he couldn't ignore the urgency in her eyes. "You're safe now," Jack said, repeating the words he had spoken earlier. "You were frozen in the snow. I found you."
"You're in my shelter," added the storm.
The woman blinked a few times, her gaze still fixed on Jack. I don't remember," she whispered, her voice filled with confusion. I was sent here." "Sent?" Jack repeated, frowning. "Who sent you? What were you doing out there?" The woman's brow furrowed, but she seemed too weak to answer. She shifted slightly in the bed, and Jack noticed her fingers twitching as if she was trying to remember something. For a long time she was silent, and Jack could hear only the wind howling outside. Finally she spoke again, her voice barely audible. "I am Seren. I was on a mission. I don't know how I ended up here." Jack's mind raced. Seren. The name seemed to resonate with him, though he couldn't place why. And a mission?
That was strange.
Nobody came out to these parts on a mission. Not anymore. Earth had long since stopped being a place of exploration and discovery. There were no missions left to send people on. "Where are you from?" Jack asked softly. "And what kind of mission?" Saren paused, her voice trembling. "I'm from Zyphoria. It's far. Too far for you to understand. We're in danger. My people are in danger. I was sent here to help save us." She looked away from Jack, her expression distant, as if she were seeing something far beyond the walls of the shelter. Jack listened intently, unsure what to make of her words. Zyphoria? He had never heard of such a place. It sounded like something out of a storybook, not like something real. But something in her voice, something in the way she spoke, made him believe her. There was no deception in her tone, only fear. "You're not from Earth, are you?" Jack asked, the realization dawning on him. Serene's eyes flickered with something, perhaps regret, perhaps shame, and she nodded slowly. No, I am not. My people are from Zyphoria. We were trying to escape, to survive, but something went wrong. My ship was sabotaged. I don't know what happened after that. I only remember being in the snow. Jack's heart tightened. Sabotaged? He had heard rumors of strange things happening in the skies, of ships falling from the heavens, but he never thought any of it was true. And now, here was a woman, an alien, by all accounts, sitting in his shelter, telling him a story that sounded impossible. So you're saying you're not human? Jack asked cautiously, his voice quiet. I am, Serene said softly, but I'm not from here. I am different, yes, but I am still like you in some ways. I don't belong here. I was meant to be somewhere else. Jack didn't know what to say. He had spent his life living in the cold, surviving in a world that had lost everything, but now he found himself in the presence of someone who was unlike anything he had ever known. An alien, stranded on his planet, with a mission he didn't understand. Is there anything I can do? Jack asked after a long silence. Anything I can help with? Serene looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Just help me remember. Help me find what I came here for. Jack nodded slowly, unsure of how to help but determined to do whatever it took. He didn't know what she needed, but he couldn't leave her alone, not now. He had brought her here, and now he would protect her. For the first time since finding her, Jack felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going. He didn't know what was ahead, what dangers lay in store, but he would face them with Serene by his side. They were both lost, both stranded in a world they didn't understand. But together, maybe they could find a way to survive. The days passed in a blur of cold nights and freezing mornings. Jack kept close watch over Serene, tending to her as she slowly recovered. The shelter was small, but it was warm enough to keep them safe from the biting cold outside. Every day the storm outside seemed to get worse, but within the walls of the shelter there was peace. Serene grew stronger, though she was still far from her full strength. Her strange armor, which Jack had carefully placed beside her every time she rested, seemed to be a source of energy for her, but it was clear that it was more than just a protective covering. It was as if the armor was alive, or at least connected to her in ways Jack couldn't understand. Jack had never been one to ask too many questions. He was a man of action, of survival. With Serene, he couldn't help himself. There was a mystery about her, a mystery that grew every time she spoke about her mission, about her people, and about Zyphoria. One evening, after a long day of scavenging for supplies, Jack returned to the shelter to find Serene sitting up, her eyes fixed on the fire. She looked better, her pale skin now having a faint glow, as if she was slowly coming back to life. But there was something in her expression that told Jack something was wrong. Serene? Jack asked, setting down his pack and walking toward her. You okay? Serene didn't look at him right away. She seemed lost in thought, her gaze distant, as if she was seeing something far beyond the walls of the shelter. I remember more, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack sat down beside her, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? I remember the mission, Serene continued. I remember what happened before I crashed. There's something I have to do, Jack. Something that's important, but I don't know if I can do it alone. Jack leaned forward, his eyes filled with concern. What's going on? What do you need? Serene finally turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. The rogue faction that sabotaged my ship, they're still looking for me. They're still looking for what I was sent here to find. They won't stop until they get it. Jack's heart sank. Rogue faction? What are you talking about? On my planet, there are people who believe that saving Zyphoria is pointless, Serene explained, her voice trembling. They think that our planet is doomed, that it's too far gone to save. They want to destroy everything we've worked for. They want to make sure no one survives, and they'll stop at nothing to make sure they get what they want. Jack stood up and paced the room, the weight of her words pressing down on him. What do they want from you? The device that could save Zyphoria. They know it's here, and they're coming. They've been following me since I crash-landed. They know I'm weak, that I can't fight them off on my own. But I can't let them have it. I can't let them destroy everything. Jack stopped pacing and looked at her. The urgency in her voice was clear. She wasn't just talking about her survival. She was talking about the survival of an entire planet, an entire species. And if these people were as dangerous as she said, then Jack knew they had to act fast. "We'll stop them," Jack said firmly. "I won't let them hurt you, Saren. I'll protect you. We'll figure this out." Saren shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. They're not just after me. They're after you too. They'll destroy everything in their path to get what they want. I'm putting you in danger just by being here." Jack stepped closer to her, his hand resting gently on her arm. "I've survived worse than this. And I'm not going to let them hurt you. You're not alone anymore, Saren." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in days, Jack saw a faint smile tug at the corners of her lips. "You're brave, Jack," she said quietly. "But you don't know what they're capable of." "I've seen enough to know what people are capable of," Jack replied. "And I've fought harder battles than this. We'll face this together. You don't have to do it alone." Saren looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, she nodded, though doubt still lingered in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. As Jack sat beside her, the weight of what lay ahead settled in his chest. He had never been a man to back down from a fight, but this was different. They weren't just fighting for survival now. They were fighting for something much bigger, for a planet, for an entire people, for Serene's future. The next few days were spent preparing. Jack scouted the area, marking out possible escape routes, and looking for anything that could be useful in case they had to fight. He knew the rogue faction wouldn't just walk up to their door. They would come in the dead of night trying to catch them off guard. And when they came, they would come with everything they had. Saren, in the meantime, spent hours working with her armor, her fingers moving over the strange symbols and controls embedded in the material. She seemed to be trying to activate something, though Jack wasn't sure what. All he knew was that the sooner they got the device working, the sooner they would have a chance to stop the rogue faction. One evening, as the storm outside raged with full force, Jack came back to the shelter to find Saren standing in front of the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. She had the device in her hands, the glowing core of it pulsing softly. "I think I can do it," Saren said, her voice steady. "I think I can activate it, but I'll need your help, Jack." Jack nodded. "Whatever you need." Saren turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. "We don't have much time. They're close. I can feel them coming." Jack felt a chill run down his spine, but he knew they couldn't wait any longer. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for. With the storm howling outside and the threat of the rogue faction closing in, Jack and Saren had no choice but to face whatever came next. Together. The storm outside had reached its peak. Snow and ice whipped through the air like sharp blades, and the wind howled with an intensity that made it feel as if the world itself was fighting back. Inside the shelter, Jack and Saren stood side by side, their backs to the fire, their eyes locked on the glowing device in Saren's hands. The time for waiting was over. "They're coming," Serene said, her voice firm but tinged with fear. "I can feel them. They know we're here." Jack nodded, his jaw tight. The rogue faction had been closing in for days, and now it was clear they were ready to make their move. Saren had been trying to activate the device, but the process was slow, and every time they thought they were close, something went wrong. Jack could see the frustration in her eyes, and he knew that if they didn't succeed soon, it might be too late. "We're running out of time," Jack said, pacing the small room. "We need to get this working now, before they get here." Saren didn't answer at first. She was focused, her fingers moving quickly over the device, pressing buttons and adjusting settings. Her face was tense with concentration, and Jack could see the strain in her features. It was clear this wasn't just about saving her people anymore. This was about survival. Her survival, and his. "I can't do this alone, Jack," Saren said softly, her voice filled with doubt. I don't know if I can make it work without you." Jack stopped pacing and turned to face her. He could see the weight of the situation in her eyes. She was scared, but she was trying to hide it. Saren had always been strong, but now, with the fate of her people resting in her hands, Jack saw a side of her he hadn't expected. She was just as vulnerable as he was. They were both alone in a strange, cold world fighting for something bigger than themselves. "We'll do this together," Jack said firmly. "I don't care what it takes. We're getting out of here." Saren nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the device. She placed her hands on the glowing core, and the light grew brighter, almost blinding. Jack could feel the energy in the air, the power that was building, and it made his heart race. This was it. They were on the edge of something big, something dangerous. But Jack wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "I need you to hold this," Saren said, handing him a small glowing piece of the device. "It will stabilize the core." If I don't do it right, everything could go wrong. Jack didn't hesitate. He took the piece and placed it into the core as Seren directed. Holding it in place as the device began to hum. The room filled with a low, vibrating sound, and the air seemed to thicken, almost as if the whole world had stopped moving. For a moment, everything was still. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as if waiting for what was to come. Serene's fingers moved quickly, adjusting settings and pressing the final buttons. Sweat glistened on her forehead, and Jack could see the tension in her body as she focused all her energy on the device. The room felt charged, alive with the raw power that was about to be unleashed. "Hold on," Serene whispered, her voice trembling. "We're almost there." The device began to glow brighter, its light filling the entire shelter. Jack squinted against the intensity, his heart pounding in his chest. It was working. It was actually working. But the glow wasn't just light. It was power. And the energy radiating from the device was unlike anything Jack had ever felt. Suddenly, the door to the shelter burst open with a deafening crash. Snow and wind rushed in, followed by a group of heavily armed men, their faces hidden behind masks. Jack's eyes narrowed as he saw the insignia on their uniforms, a symbol he recognized from the stories Saren had told him. They were the rogue faction, the ones who had been hunting her. "You should have stayed hidden, Saren," one of the men sneered, his voice muffled by the mask. "But now, you've made a mistake." Jack moved quickly, stepping in front of Saren, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. He didn't have time to waste. These men weren't here for a conversation. They were here for a fight. "I'm not letting you take her," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "Not without a fight." The men didn't hesitate. They raised their weapons, aiming them directly at Jack, but before they could fire, the device in Saren's hands flared with an intense light. It was so bright, so powerful, that it forced everyone in the room to shield their eyes. Jack felt a rush of energy, a shock wave that knocked him off his feet. The walls of the shelter seemed to shake, and for a moment Jack thought the whole place was going to collapse. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the light faded. Jack opened his eyes and looked around. The men were on the floor, unconscious, their weapons scattered around them. Serene stood in the center of the room, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. The device in her hands was glowing softly now, its power fully released. Did we win?" Jack asked, his voice shaky. Serene's eyes met his, and for the first time there was a sense of peace in them. "We did," she said softly. "Zyphoria is saved." Jack stood slowly, his body aching from the shockwave, but a sense of relief washed over him. He looked at Serene, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. But then, as he looked at her, he saw something else in her eyes. Something deeper, a sadness, almost as if she were mourning the victory. "Serene?" Jack asked, his voice gentle. "What's wrong?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I won't be able to stay here. I can't." Jack's heart dropped. "What do you mean?" "I have to return," Saren said, her voice steady but filled with sadness. "I'm not from here, Jack. I was sent to save my people. Now that it's done, I have to go back to Zyphoria." Jack's world seemed to freeze. He had known this was coming, but hearing her say it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. He had come to care for her, more than he had ever thought possible, and now he was going to lose her. "Please," Jack said, stepping closer to her. "Don't go." Saren reached out and touched his arm, her fingers gentle but firm. "I have to, Jack. My people need me." "And you have your life here, in the cold, the way you've always wanted it. But She paused, her voice breaking. "I'll never forget you." With that, she turned and stepped toward the device, her hand glowing as she activated it one last time. The light surrounded her, and Jack watched helplessly as she faded from view. And just like that, she was gone. Jack stood alone in the shelter, the wind still howling outside, and the storm finally beginning to quiet. The battle had been won. Zyphoria was saved, but Jack was left with only the memory of the woman who had changed his life forever.